The last thing Maddox Reign expected when he stepped onto the dusty Montana ranch was to nearly get kicked in the face by a horse and the woman trying to calm it. "Whoa, back up," the woman shouted, yanking the reins with practiced force as the horse bucked and snorted near the wooden gate. Maddox stumbled back in his polished loafers, clutching his briefcase like it could shield him. "Is that thing insane?" The woman turned, her hair a messy halo of sun-streaked brown curls, her face flushed. Her boots were scuffed, jeans stained with dirt and hay. She looked nothing like the women Maddox was used to in Manhattan, but her eyes, sharp, steady, and golden hazel, locked onto his with a spark of challenge. "Only when city boys get too close," she said coolly, patting the horse's neck. "This is Ranger." "He doesn't like suits." Maddox exhaled hard, shaking his head. "Neither do I lately," she raised a brow. "Then maybe you should try jeans." He didn't answer. He was already wondering if canceling his meetings and flying across the country for this so-called corporate burnout retreat had been a mistake. But the board insisted. His assistant had shoved the brochure in his hand and said, "You need to unplug or you'll drop dead." So here he was, Maddox Reign, billionaire CEO of Reign Tech, dodging hooves and judgmental horses. The ranch owner, a wiry man named Tim with a thick southern drawl, clapped Maddox on the back. "Don't mind Jessa. She trains the horses, knows them better than people, Jessa." Of course her name was Jessa. She was already walking away, leading the horse toward the stables, not sparing Maddox another glance. He should have been offended. He wasn't. He was intrigued. By sundown, Maddox was covered in dust, sweat, and a growing list of regrets. The ranch's idea of relaxation included shoveling hay, brushing horses, and eating dinner at a long wooden table with strangers who didn't care that he ran one of the most powerful tech companies in the world. But Jessa was there too, sitting across from him, laughing with the stable hands, her hands still stained from the day. She didn't look at him once. He hated how aware he was of that. "So, you ever been around horses before?" Tim asked as he passed Maddox the cornbread. "Only at charity galas," Maddox muttered. Jessa snorted, finally glancing his way. "Figures," he leaned forward. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you look like the kind of guy who thinks a saddle is decorative." The table chuckled. Maddox raised a brow. "And you look like the kind of girl who thinks Wi-Fi is a conspiracy," he shot back, her eyes lit with something dangerous and amused. "Touché." The next morning, Maddox woke to the sound of roosters and the smell of manure. He debated booking a flight back to New York right then and there. But when he stepped outside and saw Jessa leading a sleek black stallion across the paddock, something stopped him. Maybe it was the way her hand moved gently along the horse's neck. Maybe it was the way the wind tugged at her braid. Maybe it was the fact she seemed entirely, unapologetically herself. He found himself walking toward the fence, she noticed. "Didn't think you'd survive the first night." "I'm full of surprises," he said. She studied him. "You're not wearing your usual shoes." He glanced down. "Work boots." Tim had forced them on him that morning. "They're not comfortable." "Neither is honesty," she said, nodding toward the stallion. "This is Valor. Want to help me train him?" Maddox hesitated. "I don't know anything about horses." "You don't have to. Just listen, watch. Be present." He exhaled and stepped closer. By midday, he was sweating through his shirt, his arms aching from holding reins, his patience shredded. But there was something calming about the rhythm of it all, about Jessa's voice, firm but calm, guiding him through each step. "Loosen your grip," she said, adjusting his hand. "You're not controlling him, you're asking him to trust you." "Sounds like business," Maddox muttered. Jessa gave him a sideways look. "You don't trust anyone, do you?" He opened his mouth, then shut it. "I trust myself," she nodded slowly. "That's not the same." That night, Maddox stayed out by the stables long after the sun dipped behind the hills. Jessa was brushing down Valor, humming softly. He leaned against the stall door. "Why do you do this? The hard days, the danger, the dirt. You could be anywhere," she paused. "Because this is where I feel real." He didn't say anything. She turned to him. "What about you? Why are you really here?" Maddox swallowed. "Because everything in my life feels fake right now. The people, the meetings. Even my penthouse feels like a movie set. Jessa looked at him for a long moment. Well, this isn't a movie, this is a ranch, and if you want something real, you better start acting like it. He nodded. For once, he didn't have a comeback. The next morning, he brought her coffee. She looked at the cup like it was a foreign object. You bought this, made it, burned the first pot. She took it, sipped. It's awful, he cracked a rare grin. You're welcome. She smiled, and for the first time it wasn't sarcastic. Over the weekend, something shifted. He started waking up before the rooster. He started laughing real, easy laughter. He started learning how to read the horses, how to listen. But more than anything, he started noticing Jessa. The way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. The way she stood up for the animals like they were family. The way she called him out when he got too in his head. One afternoon, as they sat by the fence watching the sun dip low, he turned to her. You ever think about leaving this place? He asked. She shrugged. I tried once, lived in Dallas for a year, hated it, too much noise. Too many people pretending, he nodded. I get that, she looked at him. Why'd you come here, Maddox? Really? He met her gaze, something raw in his chest. Because I didn't know what I was missing until I got here. She blinked, and then she stood. You're leaving tomorrow. I know, she hesitated. Don't make promises you don't plan to keep. I won't. And he meant it. That night he couldn't sleep. He walked out to the stables, found Jessa there, brushing Valor again. She looked up, startled. Couldn't sleep? No. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then, without thinking, he stepped forward and kissed her. It was rough at first, too fast, too full of everything he hadn't said. But then she kissed him back, her hands tangling in his shirt, and everything slowed. When they pulled apart, she was breathless. Tomorrow's going to be hard. He pressed his forehead to hers. I know. But he wasn't ready to let her go, not even close. Maddox didn't leave at dawn. His suitcase still sat by the door of the guest house untouched. The private car he'd arranged never arrived. He'd canceled it before the sun rose. He didn't know what he was doing. Only that the idea of flying back to glass towers and contrived conversations made something in his chest tighten. Instead, he found himself standing on the edge of the corral as Jessa led Ranger through a series of exercises. She didn't look at him, didn't ask why he was still there. Maybe she already knew, or maybe she didn't want to give him the chance to explain. He waited until she finished and wiped her hands on a rag before stepping closer. I have no meetings today, he said simply. Her brow lifted, but she didn't question it. Well, good thing. Valor needs a rider this morning. And I'm not about to lift that saddle alone. You're not going to ask why I stayed. I figured if it was important you'd tell me, he nodded once. I wanted to see if this place still made sense when I didn't have one foot out the door. Jessa didn't answer right away. Then she handed him the saddle. Let's find out. They rode in silence for a while, Maddox stiff and uncertain, but less so than before. The wind carried only the rhythm of hooves and the faint creak of leather. When they finally stopped near the edge of the pasture, Jessa dismounted and sat on a sun-warmed boulder, brushing stray hair from her face. What would happen if you stopped running your company? She asked suddenly. Maddox blinked. Rain Tech wouldn't survive without me. She plucked a blade of tall grass and twisted it between her fingers. That's not what I asked, he hesitated. I don't know. I've never let go of anything long enough to find out. Jessa looked at him then, her eyes unreadable. Maybe that's the problem. Maddox sat beside her, close enough to feel the heat radiating from her skin. You're not afraid of much, are you? I'm afraid of plenty, but not of being alone, not of silence. And definitely not of starting over. He studied her, realizing something that unsettled him. You're more free than anyone I've ever met. She gave a soft laugh. Freedom's not always glamorous. Sometimes it's just knowing you've got no one to blame but yourself when things go wrong. Later that day, Jessa took him to a ridge overlooking the valley. The view was staggering, the kind of beauty that made skyscrapers look like toys. She laid out a blanket from her truck and handed him a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. He raised an eyebrow. You packed lunch? I figured you'd forget to eat. Do I seem that helpless? You seem like a man who's never had to think about meals." He unwrapped the sandwich, biting into it as the wind tugged at his collar. "This is good. I used real butter for the bread," she said, sipping from a thermos. "Not that cardboard margarine people in cities pretend is food." He laughed, the sound surprising him. "You always this stubborn about food?" "I'm stubborn about most things." Maddox leaned back on his hands, looking at her. "Why haven't you left this place for good?" "I did once. It didn't stick." "Why?" Jessa hesitated. "My dad had a stroke 3 years ago. I came back to help him run things. He passed 6 months later. By then, I realized I didn't want to leave." "I'm sorry," she nodded. "He built this place from the ground up. It was never about money, it was about legacy and love." Maddox was quiet for a long moment. "My father died when I was 16. Heart attack. He was the one who built Reign Tech. I didn't get a choice, I just stepped in." "And you've been running ever since," she said gently. "I've been surviving," he corrected. Jessa glanced at him. "There's a difference." That evening, a summer storm rolled in, sudden and electric. The sky darkened with bruised clouds and wind whipped through the trees like a warning. When the first crack of thunder sounded, Jessa was already running across the yard, shouting for Maddox to help get the horses secured. They worked in tandem. No time to think, just move. Maddox barely noticed the rain soaking through his shirt or the mud pulling at his boots. All he could focus on was Jessa's voice, steady, commanding as they moved horse after horse into shelter. By the time the last gate slammed shut, they were both drenched. She pushed wet hair from her face. "Well, that'll wake you up." He looked at her, rain dripping from his jaw, his chest heaving. "You're soaked." "So are you." He reached for her hand, and this time she let him. They stood there in the downpour, mud-streaked and breathless as the storm raged around them. "I've never felt more alive," he said quietly. Jessa's fingers tightened around his. "Then stop wasting time." He kissed her again, and it wasn't tentative this time. It was deep and certain and full of everything they hadn't said aloud. That night they dried off in the tack room, wrapped in old blankets as thunder rumbled in the distance. She leaned into his chest, her breathing steady. "I don't do casual," she whispered. "I don't either," he said. "I've had enough almosts in my life. You won't be one of mine." She looked up at him, eyes searching. "You're going back, aren't you?" "I have to, I know, but I'm not going back the same." The next morning, Maddox stood by the main barn, staring at the fields stretching out into forever. Jessa joined him, a thermos in her hand. "I made coffee," she said. He took it, sipping slowly. "It's better than mine." "I'd hope so." He turned to her. "Come with me." Jessa blinked. "To New York, not for good, just see what my world looks like. I've seen yours." "It changed mine." She didn't answer right away. "I hate elevators," he smiled. "We'll take the stairs." "I don't own anything that isn't covered in dirt. I'll buy you a dress." "I don't want to be bought." "You won't be," Jessa exhaled. "You're serious." "I've never been more." She studied him for a long moment. 3 days, he nodded. 3 days. They didn't kiss then. They didn't need to. When Maddox finally boarded the private plane waiting on the edge of a nearby airstrip, he looked out over the fields one last time. He didn't feel like he was leaving something behind. He felt like he was making room for something more. The elevator doors opened to the penthouse with a quiet chime, revealing floor-to-ceiling windows that spilled golden afternoon light across polished marble floors. Jessa stepped inside slowly, her worn duffel bag slung over one shoulder, eyes scanning the sleek, modern space with a kind of wary curiosity, like someone stepping into a museum, unsure if she belonged. "This place looks like it doesn't allow dust," she muttered, her boots soft against the pristine floors. Maddox followed her in, setting her bag down near the leather sectional. "It doesn't. My housekeeper would have a heart attack." She turned to him, brow arching. "You have a housekeeper?" "She only comes twice a week. I mostly live at the office." "That explains the lack of personality," he laughed, shaking his head. "I didn't bring you here for the daycare." "No." "You mean I didn't fly across the country to admire your designer furniture and stare out windows that don't open?" "Not unless you want to." Jessa walked past him, gaze flicking over the abstract art, the silent fireplace, the chilled bottle of wine resting in a silver bucket on the kitchen island. She touched nothing, only observed. "Where's the part of this that feels like home?" she asked. Maddox leaned against the counter, arms folded. "I don't know, I've been wondering that myself." She turned, eyes meeting his. "Then why do you stay here?" "Because I thought this was what success looked like." Jessa didn't respond. Instead, she walked over to the window, arms crossed, staring out at the city as it buzzed beneath them. "It's loud," she said finally. "I thought you'd say that. You thought right." They didn't speak for a while. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was thoughtful, like they were both trying to figure out what came next. Maddox moved closer. "You hungry?" She nodded. "If you say sushi, I swear I'll throw you off this balcony." He laughed again, reaching for his phone. "There's a restaurant a few blocks down. They make a steak that might make you cry." Now we're speaking the same language. They changed quickly. Jessa in dark jeans and a jacket Maddox had ordered for her before she arrived, something simple but sharp, tailored to fit. She'd snorted when she saw it hanging in the guest room closet. "Planning ahead, were you?" she'd said. "I had a feeling you wouldn't pack heels," he'd replied. "Damn right I didn't." Now, walking beside him along the sidewalk, the city lights bathing everything in a glow of motion and noise, Jessa moved like she was trying not to flinch at every passing car horn. Maddox slowed his pace, letting her fall into rhythm beside him. "This place never shuts up," she said, eyes narrowed at a flashing billboard. "I'm used to it." "I'm not." He glanced sideways at her. "You regret coming." "I regret not bringing earplugs." Inside the restaurant, the hostess recognized Maddox instantly, ushering them to a private booth near the back. The lighting was warm, the music low. Jessa slid into the seat across from him and picked up the menu with cautious fingers. "I can't pronounce half of this. I'll order for you." "No, you won't," he grinned. "Still don't like being told what to do, huh?" "I'm not a horse, Maddox." "No," he said softly, "you're not." Dinner passed with quiet laughter and unexpected ease. They talked about the horses, about the way Valor had started leaning into Maddox's hand whenever he approached now. Jessa described a foal born just days before he'd left, and how stubborn it had already become. "You'd like it," she said. "It kicks at everything that moves." Sounds familiar. As they stepped back into the night air, Maddox turned to her. "There's something I want to show you. It's not far." She hesitated, then nodded. "Lead the way." A black car pulled up to the curb, within moments his driver already waiting. Jessa looked at him, amused. "You called that before we even left dinner? I like being prepared." "Of course you do." The ride was short. The car stopped in front of a tall, glass-wrapped building near the river, far quieter than the main avenues. Maddox held the door open, waiting as Jessa stepped out and looked up. "What is this?" "You'll see." Inside, they took a private elevator to the top. When the doors opened, Jessa stepped into a space completely different from his penthouse. It wasn't finished concrete floors, scaffolding in one corner, exposed beams. But the view was sweeping, the windows looking out over the water, the skyline stretched like a painting. "It's under construction," she said, stepping forward. "It's mine." "I bought the floor last month." She turned to him slowly. "Why?" "Because I realized I didn't want to keep living in a space that felt like someone else's idea of success." Jessa walked to the edge of the open room, her reflection faint against the glass. "You planning to live here?" "I want to." "Eventually, when it's ready." She didn't speak. The city pulsed below them, vibrant and endless. "I was thinking," he said carefully, "about building something here that's more real, more grounded." She looked back at him. "You think one building's going to fix all that?" "No." "But it's a start." Jessa walked toward him, her boots echoing faintly against the bare floor. She stopped inches from his chest. "You're changing?" "I don't want to go back to who I was." "You can't erase who you were, Maddox." "I'm not trying to." "I'm just trying to figure out who I want to be next." Jessa stared at him, her gaze sharp, assessing, then her voice softened. "You're getting there." He reached into his coat pocket, heart pounding. "There's something else," her brow furrowed. What? He pulled out a small velvet box, opened it. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, a single diamond set in a platinum band, no frills, just truth. Jessa didn't move. I know it's fast, Maddox said. I know it's insane. We've known each other for weeks, not years. But I've been surrounded by noise my entire life, and you're the only thing that's ever made it quiet. She blinked. I'm not asking you to move in here. I'm not asking you to leave your ranch. I'm asking you to marry me so I can build something real with you from wherever we are. Jessa's throat moved as she swallowed. You don't even know how I take my coffee. You drink it black. You hate sweeteners. You like it hot and strong and fast. She stared at him. You talk to horses like they're people. You hate being underestimated. You sleep on your side, curled toward the wall. You hum when you're thinking. And when you're scared, you pretend you're not. Jessa looked down at the ring, her breath uneven. You didn't need to do all this, Maddox. Yes, I did, because I don't want you to ever think I'm not serious about you. The wind outside howled faintly, rattling the scaffolding. She took a step closer, her fingers brushing the box. I never saw this coming, she whispered. Neither did I. She reached out, lifted the ring from the box, and slipped it onto her finger. It better not turn my skin green. He let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in his body for years. It won't. Jessa looked up, eyes shining. Then I guess we're doing this. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, the city spinning below them, the future wide open. And for the first time since he could remember, Maddox Reign felt completely grounded because she was standing beside him. The last of the Montana snow had melted by the time Maddox stepped off the plane 3 weeks later, his boots touching down on the same dirt airstrip where it all began. The sky stretched wide and blue above him, unbothered by deadlines or press releases. Spring had arrived, and with it, a quiet sense of urgency he hadn't known he'd carried until now. The driver he'd hired to meet him stayed behind as Maddox took the familiar path toward the ranch. He didn't need directions. He remembered every turn, every fence post, every sun-bleached tree that had lined the road the first time he arrived, but nothing about this visit was the same. He carried no briefcase, no plans to return to the office by Monday. His phone had been off for 2 days. And on his left wrist, beneath the cuff of his shirt, was a thin braided leather bracelet Jessa had tied there the morning she flew back to Montana. She hadn't said what it meant. He hadn't asked. He passed the barn first, pausing when he heard the low, rhythmic sound of someone sanding wood. Inside, Jessa stood barefoot on a worn drop cloth, smoothing the surface of a hand-built saddle stand. Her flannel sleeves were rolled up, sawdust clinging to her arms. Maddox stepped into the doorway. You always work barefoot now, she didn't look up. Boots mess with my balance when I sand. You know there are machines for that. Machines don't care how the wood feels. He crossed the threshold, hands in his pockets. You knew I was coming. I hoped. She set the sander aside and finally met his gaze. You're early. You're surprised I didn't wait until the last possible second. I'm surprised you didn't send your assistant ahead to scout the hay bales. He laughed, a low sound that warmed the room more than the spring sun spilling through the rafters. I've been thinking about this place every day. Jessa leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. How's the view from the unfinished penthouse? Lonely and loud. She glanced at the ring still on her finger. You still sure? I'm not interested in being sure, he said. I'm interested in being here. She stepped forward, close enough that he could smell the cedar oil on her skin. You ready for what that means, Maddox? This isn't a weekend anymore. I didn't fly halfway across the country to play cowboy. Jessa tilted her head. So what did you come back for? He reached into his jacket and pulled out a rolled-up blueprint, spreading it across the dusty table between them. I bought the property next to yours, her brow furrowed. The old cattle pasture. I'm building a training facility, he said. State-of-the-art, climate-controlled, year-round riding arena. You'll run it, she blinked. You're serious. I'm not trying to take anything from you. I'm trying to build something with you. You'll have full control. I'll handle the funding and the logistics, but it's your name that goes on the gate. Jessa stared down at the plans, her fingers brushing the ink. Why would you do this? Because I don't want to go back to a life where I only see you in stolen weekends. Because I've spent years investing in things that meant nothing, and because you made me want to build something that matters. She was silent for a long moment, then she folded the blueprint, set it aside, and looked at him. I want to see it, he nodded. I figured you would. They spent the next hour walking the perimeter of the pasture, her boots kicking through the wild grass, his steps careful beside hers. She asked questions about insulation, rotation schedules, and feed storage. He answered each one with a calm confidence that surprised even him. You've been doing your homework, she said, resting her arms on the fence. I don't do things halfway anymore, she turned toward him. You're really staying. I'm not just staying, he said. I'm settling. Jessa's gaze softened. I don't want you to give up who you are for me. I'm not, he said. I'm becoming who I was supposed to be. They didn't kiss then. They didn't need to. They just stood there watching the land that would soon hold a piece of both of them. Later that week, Maddox found himself at the town's hardware store, studying bolts of fencing wire and arguing with a teenage clerk about the merits of different post drivers. Jessa stood a few aisles away, comparing saddle soap brands like she was picking out wine. When they reached the register, the older woman behind the counter gave them a curious smile. You two new around here, Jessa shook her head. He's learning, the woman chuckled. Well, he looks like he's got good instincts. And better taste than most. Maddox paid in cash, his black credit card tucked away, unused. That night, Jessa cooked in the kitchen of the main ranch house, barefoot again, humming while she stirred something that smelled like rosemary and garlic. Maddox set the table without being asked, placing mismatched plates and folding napkins the way she'd taught him. They ate by candlelight, not because it was romantic, but because the power had gone out for 20 minutes during a passing storm and Jessa refused to wait. I never imagined you as the kind of man who'd eat off chipped china by candlelight, she said between bites. I never imagined being happy in a house without central air, he replied. They sat back after dinner, the storm moving on, the sky clearing in streaks of lavender and gold. Maddox leaned his head against the window frame, watching the stars blink into view. Do you ever miss it? Jessa asked. The city, the pace. I miss the illusion, he said, that if I just achieved one more thing, I'd finally be enough. She looked at him. You are enough, you always were. You just forgot. He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. Will you marry me here on the land? I thought I already said yes. You did. But I want you to say it again. Because I'm not the same man you said yes to in that rooftop shell. Jessa's eyes didn't leave his. Then yes. Again and again. They married 2 weeks later under the open sky with the ridgeline behind them and the horses grazing quietly nearby. The ceremony was simple. A few close friends, the ranch staff, and a local pastor who'd known Jessa since she was a child. She wore a cream dress that brushed the tops of her boots. Maddox wore a navy suit, his cufflinks the only trace of his former life in Manhattan. When they exchanged vows, there were no elaborate metaphors or grand speeches, only truth, only clarity, only love. As they danced that night in the barn strung with lights and the scent of hay and wildflowers, Maddox whispered into her ear, You didn't just change my life. Jessa leaned her head against his chest. I didn't, you gave it back to me. Outside, the sky spun with stars. And inside, beneath the beams of a barn built by her father's hands, Maddox Reign finally felt what he'd been chasing his entire life. Peace. Real, breathtaking peace. And the woman who had taught him how to find it danced in his arms, barefoot and fearless, exactly where she belonged. The morning sun cast a soft amber glow over the porch of the ranch house, filtering through the gauze curtains of the kitchen where Jessa stood barefoot, mixing dough with her hands buried deep in flour. The radio played faintly in the next room, something old and twangy about falling in love without warning. Maddox leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, watching her. You know you've got at least 3 different kinds of flour in that pantry, right? He asked. She didn't look up. And I know exactly what each one does. You're not getting biscuits that collapse like soufflés. He stepped into the kitchen, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. What if I like my biscuits unpredictable? She raised a brow. Then you better start baking your own. Maddox grinned, reaching for the coffee pot. I'll leave the biscuits to the expert. It had been nearly 2 months since they'd married under the spring sky, and life had settled into an unexpected rhythm, one that neither of them had anticipated, but had grown into like a second skin. The training facility next door was weeks from completion. The skeleton of the arena stood tall and proud, its beams a mix of steel and timber, a reflection of both of them. Maddox had traded his boardroom for barn stalls. He hadn't stepped foot in Manhattan since the wedding, and the silence from his board had grown louder by the day. But he hadn't felt panic. Not once. There was something grounding in the rhythm of the ranch, in waking up before the sun to the low rumble of hooves and the scent of cedar and leather. Jessa slid a tray of biscuits into the oven and dusted off her hands. I got a letter from the county yesterday. Good news or trouble, they approved the grant for the rescue program. She leaned against the counter. We'll be able to take in 12 more horses by fall. Maddox set down his mug. That's incredible. Her smile was quiet, proud. It's not just mine anymore. You've helped make this place grow. He walked over, resting a hand on her waist. I just followed your lead. No, she said, her voice softer now. You built something beside me. That's different. They stood in stillness for a moment, the scent of baking biscuits curling through the room. She tilted her head slightly. I know this isn't the life you had planned, she said. I didn't plan anything past quarterly projections and product launches. And you're okay with it. All of it? Maddox's gaze didn't waver. I wake up beside you. I work with my hands. I know the names of every horse on this ranch. I've never been more okay in my life. Jessa exhaled, tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying leaving her shoulders. Good. Because I was worried. He stepped closer. What about that you'd miss the noise, that you'd start resenting the quiet? I don't need the noise to feel alive anymore. I just need this. He kissed her forehead. You, this place, the work. It's more real than anything I've ever known. Later that day, they rode out past the north pasture where the wildflowers had started blooming in clusters of gold and violet. Jessa guided her mare with a quiet grace while Maddox, now comfortable in the saddle, let the reins rest loosely in his hands. Think the new stable manager will work out? She asked. He's got good instincts, respected the space, didn't try to impress anyone. That's rare, I know. Reminded me of a girl I met who didn't care who I was and nearly let her horse kick me in the face. She laughed. He was just giving you a proper welcome. As they crested the ridge, the training facility came into view in the valley below. The roof was nearly complete, and crews moved like ants across the construction site. Maddox pulled his horse to a stop, looking down at it. You think your dad would have liked this? Jessa squinted toward the horizon. He would have asked why you didn't use reclaimed wood for the beams, Maddox chuckled. I tried, supply chain delays. He'd have given you hell for that. I could take it, she turned to him. But yes, he would have liked it, not because it's big or shiny, but because it's being built for the right reasons. They dismounted and walked their horses back to the stables as the sun dipped lower. The evening air was cool, the scent of honeysuckle threading through the breeze. Inside the barn, Jessa began brushing down her mare while Maddox filled the water trough. He glanced at her over his shoulder. Do you still think about leaving? He asked. She paused. No. I don't feel like I'm holding my breath anymore. Good. Why? Because I have a surprise for you. She turned, arms folded. If this surprise involves heels or another dress, I'm going to throw it in the fire. No heels, he said, wiping his hands on a towel. Come with me. He led her down the gravel path past the equipment shed, past the chicken coop where 2 hens squawked indignantly at the disturbance, and stopped in front of the small, unused barn on the far side of the property. The structure had been empty for years, its siding faded, the door hanging slightly crooked. Jessa tilted her head. I thought we were tearing this down. Not anymore. Maddox opened the door and stepped aside. Inside, soft lighting illuminated what had once been a dusty storage space. Now, shelves lined the walls filled with jars of preserved herbs, leather care supplies, and hand-stitched saddle cloths. A wide workbench stood in the center, its surface freshly polished. A small stove crackled quietly in the corner. Jessa stepped inside slowly, eyes wide. "What is this?" "Your workshop," he said. "For the leatherwork, for the saddle designs, for whatever you want to make." She turned to him, stunned. "You remembered. You mentioned it once, that you never had a space that was just yours." Her voice wavered. "I didn't think you were really listening." "I always listen to you." She crossed the room and ran her hand along the bench. "You built this, every nail." She turned, eyes shining. "This is the best gift anyone's ever given me." "It's not a gift," he said. "It's the beginning of everything." That night, they sat on the porch wrapped in a single blanket, the stars scattered above them like a promise. Maddox held her hand, brushing his thumb over her knuckles. "There's something else I've been thinking about," he said. She didn't look away from the sky. "If it's more construction, maybe wait until the morning." "It's not." He shifted slightly to face her. "I want to start a family with you." Jessa froze, then turned her head slowly. "You do? I want to build a life that's more than meetings and deadlines. I want little feet on these porch steps. I want someone to teach how to ride and how to dream without limits." She blinked hard. "I didn't think you'd want that. I didn't know I did, not until you." She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I do too." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "We'll take it slow." "Maybe," she said, a smile in her voice, "but I wouldn't mind if it happened fast." Seasons passed. The facility opened in late summer, drawing attention from across the state. Trainers came to learn from Jessa. Maddox took over operations, managing everything from supply chains to grant applications with a calm he'd never known in his old life. They built a home beside the arena, a simple farmhouse, white with navy shutters, a wide wraparound porch where they had coffee in the mornings and slow dances under the stars at night. And when autumn came, Jessa found herself standing beside Maddox in their small kitchen, holding a single white stick in her hand, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. He cupped her face gently. "Are you okay?" She laughed through the tears. "I'm pregnant." Maddox pulled her into his arms, holding her like the world had narrowed to just that moment. "We're ready," he whispered. "We're so ready." The silence that followed was full, not empty. And in the quiet of that Montana evening, they stood together, no longer the tech mogul and the horse trainer, no longer from two different worlds, but one life, one love, one beginning. And this time they weren't chasing peace. They were living it.